in today's event. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all who are with us. This is our knowledge event. It's a seventh of the series organized by ADB's Emerging Areas team, Energy Sector Group, and we are very much happy to introduce this as the venue for operationalizing frontier technologies, integrated solution, and the opportunity to foster and drive innovation in the policy and operational issues in ADB and beyond, as well as to catalyze the thoughts, leadership, and future-looking bank-wide initiatives for future business. Collaborate across our departments and units for innovative solutions, identify and develop knowledge and flagship events, and mobilizing co-financing. Today, we will be having three presentations by our participants, by our presenters. We will ask our speakers on the time allocated for the presentations. It's going to be about 15 minutes. And we will be having a Q&A at the end of the presentation. And the questions can be posted on the chat box, and we would be reading, or by raising hands and using the mic. And now I would like to introduce ADB's Emerging Areas Director, Cindy Tianko, who will do the opening remarks for us. Thank you. Over to you, Cindy.
Thank you very much, Raphael. Good evening, Asia and the Pacific, and good morning, Europe. Welcome all to our seventh webinar in the series of knowledge sharing events that the Emerging Areas team, Energy Sector, has conducted so far. We really hope that at the end of today's webinar, everyone will have gained more understanding and appreciation about the latest technological advancements in solar energy. As you know, PV systems have become a foundation in our global shift toward clean, renewable energy. And thanks to groundbreaking innovations, solar PV is now seamlessly integrated with state-of-the-art technologies. It is revolutionizing industries worldwide, for example, in transportation, healthcare, and agriculture sectors, thus fast accelerating the transition to a more sustainable future. In the transportation sector, one of the most exciting developments is the push for net zero railway systems. I'm thrilled to share that we have successfully brought in an esteemed speaker from a UK-based company deeply involved in the decarbonization of transport systems. Their website features an inspiring slogan. Our vision is to power railways with unsubsidized direct wire renewable generation whilst delivering significant social impact for line-side communities. This vision perfectly highlights the energy transport nexus, which goes beyond just reducing carbon, but also include the social benefits for local communities and commuters. Through this approach, local residents will not only be part of the solution, but will also have the opportunity to own and directly benefit from the clean energy that powers their trains, creating a truly sustainable and inclusive energy future. I would just like to highlight one example of this that ADB is doing. Raphael is actually leading a railway decarbonization initiative in Azerbaijan. So we're looking forward to that. The healthcare industry too is benefiting from solar energy. One of the most promising advancements is the use of solar hydrogen systems in hospitals. Our speakers, also from UK companies, will be showcasing their work on how integration of technologies ensure that healthcare facilities, even in remote underserved areas, are able to deliver uninterrupted essential services while also reducing their carbon footprint due to having renewable power supply. This is indeed revolutionary. In agriculture, agrivoltaics is also transforming food production innovatively. And you will hear from speakers from Singapore how this dual-use technology can enhance food security and promote sustainable farming, making it an ideal solution for meeting the growing energy and food demands, especially in our part of the world. I cannot contain my excitement to learn more from today's session, and I hope you do too. I thank our honored speakers from everyone for making the time to join us from around the globe Thank you to my ADB colleagues, Rafael for moderating today's session. May this webinar spark new ideas and make meaningful decisions for the future. With that said, let's get started. Thank you. You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Cindy. I hope, oh, sorry, my laptop is a bit glitchy. Thank you for opening remarks. This is really inspiring. I would like now to pass the floor to our presenters and speakers. We have Stella Henderson and we have Giuseppe Cerce from Future Value Global. And the subject for today's presentation is potential of solar hydrogen for remote healthcare energy security. Stella and Giuseppe, they're both leading the firm, and Stella is a founder of the Future Value with 20+ years of social sector experience in Asia Pacific. As a chief executive, he is focused on Future Value becoming a leading regenerative development company globally and responsible for multinational activities, balancing profit, people, and planet. He is very experienced in fundraising with over 200 million and future income growth, constant clients, delivered ESG framework development, including impact investment criteria, and formed an innovative 100 million impact investment fund for property. Giuseppe is a senior engineer at BPP Renewables, where he leads the development of innovative renewable energy and green hydrogen projects. To date, he has successfully delivered renewable energy projects worth over 2.5 million euro, playing a pivotal role in advancing a company's goal. In addition, he has built a strong relationship with major equipment suppliers and international partners across Europe, Asia, Australia, PNG, and Africa, and expanding the company's global footprint and strengthening the position for renewable energy sector. Over to you.
Well, thank you, Rafael, for the introduction. Should we share our screen?
Yes, please.
I guess so. Okay. Solar, should I share mine? Oh, let's see. Okay. Well, Salah, can you share yours? I'm used to Teams. Sorry, guys.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you. Okay.
Can we see?
Yep.
Great.
Please go ahead.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for the introduction, Rafael. Giuseppe, if you'd like to get us underway.
Yeah, thank you, Salar, and thank you, Rafael, for the introduction. So yes, the agenda for this meeting will be to provide you an overview of our companies, both PPP Renewables and Future Value, a quick overview of hydrogen, what is, how it is produced, what's the main benefit of hydrogen, and the potential role of hydrogen for developing countries. Then we will dive into some insights about the two projects we've been delivered, co-funded by the UK government for remote healthcare facilities in Papua New Guinea and Philippines. And then we will conclude with a focus on how this project and solution can support providing energy access and security for healthcare facilities. So BPP Renewables is an engineering consultancy company that was established in 1989. So we support both the oil and gas, offshore wind sector and green hydrogen sector, most widely renewable. So our key services span from front-end engineering design, risk assessment, innovation strategy, and product development, as we collaborate closely with offshore wind farm developers, supporting the installation of both fixed and floating offshore wind farm, the design of subsea power cable, and we also investigate failures in cables which are related to the risk and insurance sectors. In the green hydrogen space, we specialize in the design of green hydrogen production system and solar microgrid with applications in decarbonization potential for different industrial processes. And our services spans from holistic system design, structuring financial models, high-level stakeholder engagement, including government agencies, public and private companies. Yeah, so over to you, Salar.
Thanks very much, Giuseppe. So Future Value is actually an Australian-based company. We're a group structure, including a Papua New Guinean subsidiary, and we're working in different markets in Indo-Pacific. We describe ourselves as a regenerative development company, meaning that we are looking to meet critical needs within communities with a community focus, but we have a global approach through collaboration. So what we are looking at is solving wicked problems within communities. We have deep community engagement on the ground. We have expertise in baseline assessments and gap analysis, and we work through co-design and ideation with stakeholders to actually meet the needs of those critical needs of those communities. Most importantly, we also do in-country implementation, which we'll be talking about a little bit later when we talk about both Philippines and Papua New Guinean projects.
Okay, so let's dive into the key content of this presentation. So what's hydrogen? So hydrogen should be seen as a clean energy vector, not as a direct energy source, because it is produced from different sources, mainly natural gas and renewable energy. Depending on the type of processes, as you may know, we classify hydrogen in different colors. More specifically, like gray and blue hydrogen comes from fossil fuel sources, while when we talk about green hydrogen, we talk about a molecule that is produced using renewable energy to drive a water electrolysis process. What is interesting is that right now, globally, 96% of the global hydrogen production comes from fossil fuel, and only 4% is coming from renewable energy and water electrolysis. And there is a huge attention to shift this percentage, and the two main reasons, for two main reasons. Next slide, please. So the first reason is because of the huge potential of hydrogen to decarbonize different sectors, which are shown here on the left side of this slide, which includes industrial applications that utilize hydrogen as a chemical feedstock, so replacing gray hydrogen, but also for the production of clean heat with the combination of hydrogen and oxygen, but also with the potential hydrogen as the potential to decarbonize the transportation sector, both road, aviation, and maritime. And it is increasingly seen the role of hydrogen for to provide power, both to stabilize the grid in developed country, but also to provide access in a remote site, which it's the focus of this presentation. So on the right side, you will see the expected demand of hydrogen per the different sectors. And as you can see, the behavior is quite exponential from 2020 to 2050 for each sector. Next slide. So the second reason is, despite the high cost of producing green hydrogen compared to traditional way, which means gray hydrogen, nowadays green hydrogen production. It's 3 to 5 times more expensive than gray hydrogen with different variables. But because of the reduced cost of renewable energies globally, renewable energy sources globally, the technological advancement of key technologies such as electrolyzer and fuel cell, and the economy of scale, the cost of green hydrogen production is expected to be reduced by 62%. This was a percentage referring to the cost of 2020 and 2030, but the trajectory is this one. So there are still some challenges, which we thought it is fair to report as well, which is not just cost or operational efficiency. So when talking about green hydrogen, it needs to be verified that there is an infrastructure availability, both for the production, transportation, storage, and utilization. Hydrogen needs infrastructure that also need to be supported by financial incentives, both at the production and demand side. This is referred as a chicken egg problem most of the time. Clear policy frameworks is really important as well. And there is a need of technological expertise, skills development, and a supportive business environment. Next slide. So interestingly, hydrogen, despite all these challenges, hydrogen is play a pivotal role in forging and shaping geopolitics globally and relationship between different countries. The focus of this slide is to show the different import-export flows of hydrogen for each country and the role that developing countries are expected to play in the near future. So if we look at South America, for example, South America is seen as a big exporter of hydrogen. This is because of the low cost of renewable energy, that's mainly hydropower there, but the lack of infrastructure and lack of potential hydrogen domestic demand are the key driving factor for to drive the export of green hydrogen. But there is a shift in the narrative on the role that hydrogen can play for developing country, as it can. If you go on the next slide, please. So these are the opportunities that hydrogen can have for developing countries. So hydrogen can be the catalyst for the investment in renewable energy generation and the installation of new assets. It can, as we discussed, enable the deep decarbonization of different industrial sectors and so reduce the reliance on diesel, which is expensive, specifically for remote areas, also for big industrial plant. The adoption of hydrogen can help fast track also the implementation of clean energy transition roadmap. Selar will touch about this. We have really great engagement in PNG and in Philippines, and there is huge interest to incorporate hydrogen as an option and forging clean energy transition map. But this will have also the advantage to reduce the risk for and attracting foreign direct investment as when the target and the goal are well defined from a national point of view. And this, the adoption of hydrogen, which comes again with adoption of renewable energy sources, can be onshore wind, offshore wind, or solar, for example, will help the creation of skilled jobs. So what are the available options? In specifically here, we're talking. We wanted to have a focus on developing countries. What is the option to implement hydrogen system in developing countries, or more widely, really? But this is what HDF and Hydrogen de France (HDF) did, for example, in French Guiana. This is a large-scale green solar hydrogen production system, which is able to power 10,000 households. So it's quite peculiar, the business model of HDF Energy. So they believe solar hydrogen can play a role in this scale in the Pacific countries where the cost of the power from the grid is expensive and the grid is constrained because of the lack of capacity and impossibility to growth. For example, in the Philippines, because of the frequency of typhoon. So it's not worth to invest in overhead lines, for example. Next slide, please. So the other option, which is that one we are more interested, is to downscale the hydrogen system by implementing containerized unit that can be easily deployed in remote communities, decentralized processes that have not reduced access to electricity grid. This is a picture from a supplier in Australia, but in the UK there are companies that are developing the same solutions. So it's quite innovative, but at the same time it's already at the high TRL 9 is commercially available. It's pretty modular. It contains everything. So electrolyzer, batteries, hydrogen canister, so hydrogen storage and fuel cell, which provide powers. It's modular, deployable. It's possible to monitoring it from it's possible to implement remote monitoring. So this is what we designed and in our projects for PNG and Philippines. Next slide. I think it's over to you now.
Thanks, Giuseppe. Sorry, there's a small delay in the transference of the slides. So that's a good segue into energy access and the drivers for renewable energy access for healthcare facilities. So I don't think to ADB and participants today that any of this will be too much of a surprise. We know that electricity prices are high in the Indo-Pacific generally, particularly in urban areas, but in rural and remote areas, that is often exacerbated or increased significantly due to high costs from a reliance on diesel. We know that there are issues around grid reliability, but more significantly, in places like Papua New Guinea, access is still the biggest issue. So it's not going to be about transition for a country like that. It's going to be about how do we increase electricity access. From there, we've got issues around energy consumption and the ability to actually meet energy demand. But if we look a little bit more closely into healthcare facilities particularly, then we start to see reliability issues that really start to play out with reliable electricity for just between 4 to 12 hours per day, or in some cases, no power at all. So this obviously has significant impact on the ability to provide healthcare services. The dependence on fossil fuels makes climate mitigation difficult, and the high costs in maintaining that for healthcare facilities is a challenge. And one of the areas of particular interest for us that we'll touch on a little bit later is the availability of oxygen. Many rural healthcare facilities struggle to get reliable oxygen supply, and if they do, it can be very expensive. This is obviously one of the critical needs in a hospital or healthcare facility, especially because vulnerable groups, and particularly women, for example, giving birth, we have rising maternal deaths in both Philippines and Papua New Guinea rather than declining. So one of the things that we need to actually look at is how do we intervene in that particular circumstance. Whereas the evidence is showing that deaths among hospitalized newborns and children will fall by 25% when oxygen is provided. So it's a basic, but it's not something that's yet been solved, and we'll come back to that. And of course, there are climate targets that countries like the Philippines and Papua New Guinea are aiming for, very ambitious, but they are struggling to actually meet those, even though solar is a critical part of NDC targets and ability to implement renewable energy systems. The reality is that operational challenges and sometimes geography and topography issues are causing issues for healthcare facilities in particular, and their ability to either electrify or to transition to renewable energy. So we started to look at the opportunity here around solar hydrogen microgrids to address these energy challenges, focusing on really three key areas, which is energy reliability, fossil fuel reliance, and climate resilience. How could we meet those key challenges? Where we also then identified that there are additional system benefits to hydrogen, which is in oxygen production as a byproduct. Generally, globally at the moment, oxygen is vented as a waste product. So how could we utilize that? And then also clean water, which is critical in relation to hospital and community needs. So we're looking at main goals are around healthcare enhancement, but also environmental sustainability. So the displacement of fossil fuels or shifting away. How can we enhance community impact through improving energy access, but also from our perspective, what is the business case of hydrogen potential and how can we make the most of that? So we've actually been conducting two feasibility studies, one in the Philippines, which is looking at a microgrid solution, and the other one in Papua New Guinea, which is looking at standalone off-grid. Both these projects are co-funded by UK Research and Innovation, and we have been working on these for the last 12 months, and we're just reaching the conclusions over the next few days, and then final report writing over April. So two images there of the actual hospital sites that we have done full-scale health needs and site assessments of. So what is our approach? Well, we need to start with understanding what is the benefit to the stakeholders. So how is renewable energy actually going to support reduction of carbon footprint, decentralization and close to consumption? How can it support energy equity in areas where they are struggling, but also system resilience, and particularly with climate impacts becoming much more prevalent? So what we need to do is, when we are looking at the constraints and potential solutions, is we need to do comprehensive health needs and site assessment. Then we need to move through into system design and simulation before we move into techno-economic analysis and business model. And then finally, we can start doing policy assessment and then look at deployment. And as an example, on the right-hand side, the Kakori Hospital aerial view with a simulated solar array. So part of the simulation that we've been doing. So some of the key findings that we have with these two hospitals is Kakori Hospital, being a remote off-grid hospital, has a fairly limited daily energy demand compared to a more island-based provincial hospital in the Central Visayas in the Philippines. But neither of the grid-connected or the independent systems are actually meeting the energy demand for the hospital. So some of the issues that we've identified is particularly in Papua New Guinea, underpowered, experiencing power blackouts, the cost of diesel and supply and genset reliability, real issues for them. Whereas compared with the Garcia Memorial Provincial Hospital, we're really looking at fossil fuel prevalence of 86% in Central Pacifica's grid. It's constrained, leading to brownouts. It is climate vulnerable infrastructure. In the last super typhoon, the hospital was actually offline for 3 months. And in both cases, we have a lack of policy framework that is going to need to be addressed. So while in PNG, it's about energy access, in the Philippines, it actually is more around energy transition, but both are being impacted by energy security, i.e. how to achieve reliable 24/7 power, and both have some form of climate mitigation requirements as well, either in displacement or around resilience. And it is important to note from our perspective that in the research, the global recommended standard for healthcare facilities is actually 72 to 96 hours of power backup. That's quite significant. And in most cases, hospitals are not achieving anywhere near that kind of reliance. So we started to look at the system design. What did we need to consider in relation to a green hydrogen system? Obviously, we're looking at renewable energy as the source to actually drive the electrolyzer to produce hydrogen. The innovation here particularly is both the storage of hydrogen and the storage of oxygen, and the ability to use both of those, one for backup, one for daily use. And then the co-benefits that come out of that, which leads into clean water, for example, for the hospital, and the ability to support or provide oxygen services for health services and treatment. So the backup is the key part about hydrogen. It was not necessarily intended to be a driver for energy use. However, when we simulated results, particularly in Papua New Guinea for power outages, it was quite obvious that the fuel cell was able to play a very, very important part in backing up the power demand for the hospital. In this particular case, 24 hours per month, we could demonstrate that the fuel cell was actually contributing 25% of the full power demand over that period of time. So that was very positive from our perspective. So where are we now? We are about to finalize the business model and the feasibility results for both parallel feasibilities. We've identified that there's actually a significant opportunity to address the need of healthcare facilities in the Indo-Pacific, focusing on developing economies where the cost of electricity is very high or there are limitations around grid connection. We think that not only is the new technology deployable, but we also think that we need to look more closely at what climate finance initiatives can be brought to bear, and we need to start measuring what the social impact actually is of empowering these healthcare facilities. So we're at right now, finalising our business model. We're confirming our supply chain partnerships across the region, and we're now at the next stage of looking at project financing so that we can actually deploy a pilot system. And we are in continuous engagement with different stakeholders, including regulators, to ensure that we and they understand what is actually required to deploy. So one of the things that we're obviously looking at is how can we create demand for hydrogen? We're looking at the opportunities of advanced market commitments and subsidies for healthcare facilities. So basically having a sectoral focus to attract private sector investment through some kind of demand signal. Recently, Giuseppe and I were in Papua New Guinea presenting to a range of stakeholders, including the national regulator, and we raised the possibility of how could we look at some kind of renewable energy financing facility, perhaps 50 to 100 million, that was going to be focusing on hydrogen. Created a lot of interest even within that particular market. So we think that that is one potential mechanism that we could be using. Giuseppe.
Yep. But I think you covered it all. Yep. I will just add that, yeah, as a UK company as well, we're trying to support and continue this partnership with Stellar by looking at potential acceleration support, a specialized program that will provide us the finance to test and deploy this system in a first of its kind world application, because this has never been done for hospital. So that's my final point for this session. Thank you. Thank you, Solar.
Thank you, Giuseppe.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Giuseppe. These are very interesting presentation, and again, it's very enlightening. I guess you highlighted quite a few challenges for environment and operating risks and opportunities. It's really amazing that one of the facts you put on the slide is that about 43% of the healthcare facilities in PNG, they don't have a reliable or no power at all. This is really very starking statistics. And the other interesting things you highlighted is that the solution doesn't come for the security of energy supply, but it comes as a package solution for the healthcare in terms of the oxygen production. And this is also consistent with what the services are about in the healthcare. Interestingly, this is a really very containerized solution, meaning it's really mobile and it's easy in deployment, and apparently the operation and maintenance seem to be quite an easy and in terms of the sustaining this asset. We will be having a few questions to you, but if you wouldn't mind, we keep it until the end, because I think there will be some cross-cutting subjects with other two presentations. Please bear with us, and we'll come back with some questions to you and the other presenters, if it's
No
okay.
problem. Thanks, Raphael.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now I would like to ask next presenter, Leo Murray, who is the CEO of the Reading Sunbeams, and he is a seasoned energy and transport decarbonization specialist. He is a co-founder of the firm, where he has leading the research and development and working for potential for solar rail in South Wales and India. He is developing this as a new stream of activities, and he is experienced in these solutions and contributed a lot in UK government policy documents such as Net Zero Strategy and the Transport Decarbonization Plan. He is also a co-founder of and the director of innovation and climate action charity Possible, one of the Reading Sunbeams parent companies. And he is going to present today and share his experience from the India case study. Over to you, Leo.
Thanks so much, Raphael. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Can you see my screen?
Absolutely.
Great. So Riding Sunbeams is, I had a great introduction from Raphael there. Riding Sunbeams is a UK-based business that has come out of two non-profits, but we've had about $500,000 in private investment over the last few years as well. Set up to, as Cindy said earlier, supply railways directly with solar energy. So not via the grid, but via co-location and a private wire connection to a traction power system. So this was an idea that I had back in 2016. And by 2017, we had done a feasibility study showing that it had legs. It would work technically and actually commercially. It looked like an attractive way to bring forward new solar. So we started a business and we did a demonstrator project in 2019. Now it's taking a very long time for UK railways to work out how to procure electricity in this way. While we've been waiting for them to do that, we've been looking at where else might be attractive. And of course, India is really the top of the list. It's probably the best place in the world for this innovation. So why is that? I'm just going to run through. You may not know this. Indian Railways broad gauge network will be 100% electrified in 2025, certainly in this financial year, 25-26. The only other country in the world that has 100% electrified railways is Switzerland. It's always been 100% electrified. They've never had any domestic sources of hydrocarbon energy. They've got lots of cheap hydro power, and so they've always been fully electrified as long as there's been electrified railways. Indian Railways, it's been absolutely extraordinary. So 2021-22, on an average day, Indian Railways electrified 8 times as many route kilometres as the UK electrified in the entire year. This is a graph I put together for this. You can't really see Great Britain's rail electrification rates on here, but so I've pulled them out in the numbers. And if you look at those middle 3 years in this 5-year period, the 3 years running, Indian Railways actually added more electrified network. It added the same amount as the UK's entire electrified network every year for 3 years running. So it's an absolutely staggering rate of electrification. It's much faster than any Western nation has achieved. And it's unprecedented as far as I know. However, so rail electrification is essential. It's like step one. People have experimented with hydrogen trains. It's not a good idea. There are other use cases, like as we've heard from these guys, there are other use cases for hydrogen, and you want hydrogen for the parts of the economy that you can't reach with direct electrification and batteries, and that is not trains. So electrification is really step one for decarbonisation of railways, but it is not adequate on its own. This is an image from a coal operation in India. We calculated that in the first instance, as Indian Railways moves to full electrification and replaces all of its diesel fleet with electric multiple units, it's going to cause a roughly third increase in Indian Railways carbon emissions. And that is because the carbon intensity of India's grid is so high because it is so dominated by coal still. So although they've been rapidly adding renewable energy to the supply mix, they've also been building new coal. Demand for electricity in India is skyrocketing. It goes up by an enormous amount every year. In 2020, Prime Minister Modi gave Indian Railways a net zero target of 2030. Now, so they had a 10-year countdown to completely decarbonize. India's net zero target is currently 2070. So this is extremely ambitious for Indian Railways, much more ambitious than anything else in the country. Indian Railways is the biggest employer in India. It's also the biggest electricity user. It uses between 1% and 2% of all power in India. So it's got a really, really important role to play in spearheading decarbonisation of the Indian economy. So to achieve that target, the Rail Ministry estimates that Indian Railways will need about 30 gigawatts of solar and wind capacity. So this is the projected energy consumption of Indian Railways over coming years, up to the point where it's got to achieve net zero. So you can see every year the task gets harder because the energy demand goes up. That increase to 2030 implies a roughly 1% increase in India's total electricity generation. That's just from the adding of new electricity demand to Indian Railways. It's not just that they're electrifying the network, which they'll finish this year. They're also building new railways. So they're building dedicated freight corridors, they're building high-speed lines, and they are also adding 100 kilometers, a couple of 100 kilometers of new regular railway line each year, as well as the metros are all expanding. Now, India's electrification, it's important to understand, is not just being driven by net zero. Far from it. It's also been driven by the Atmanirbhar Bharat initiative, which includes lots of different things. It's an economic strategy for India to become self-reliant. And India currently imports about almost 90% of its oil, and Indian Railways was the biggest user of that oil, right? So they were the biggest consumer of diesel. So this is also about just improving the balance of trade for India. And it's expensive. It's very expensive using imported diesel. So meanwhile, renewable energy has just been on a journey of continuous cost reductions. And really, for the last few years, solar has been by far the cheapest source of new electricity in India for a good few years now, to the point where it's really very difficult to compete with it. A couple of rupees per kilowatt hour is the kind of price that has been returned on large government tariff, government tenders. So that makes renewable energy very attractive. If you're able to get it, it's better than buying thermal power from the grid. So Indian Railways is so vast that it has its own separate body that has been set up, whose only role is to procure energy for the railways, and that's the Railway Energy Management Company. It's a JV between the Rail Ministry and RITES, which is actually another state-owned entity. The sole purpose is sourcing energy for the railways, and that means that it's basically REMCO's responsibility to meet the net zero target, because nearly all of Indian Railways emissions are from moving trains, from traction energy. So they've got 3 key work streams in how they're doing this. There's the station rooftop solarization program, which are going great guns. There's corporate sleeved power purchase agreements, which are becoming commonplace around the world. They're kind of replacing state-run subsidy programs, price support, and direct wire traction supply. So look, this is an example of a solar roof. There are loads of these. We've got over 1,000 stations that are already done, really big ones. They're moving on to small rural stations now. They're going to have 1 gigawatt of installed rooftop capacity by 2027. And then this is a shot of the Rewa Ultra Mega Solar project, biggest solar in the world as far as I know. And a couple of 100 megawatts of that is contracted to Indian Railways. Those kind of power purchase agreements sleeved with very large generators over the grid, they're going to be the main way India meets its net zero targets. It's solar PPAs, it's wind PPAs, but it's also this new thing which has been around for a couple of years, been very successful, round the clock power purchase agreements, where renewable generators bundle up with storage providers, and together they offer a tariff in response to a tender. And that is now, this is a chart from Indian Railways net zero carbon emission plan, their action plan, and you can see as thermal generation, which is the orange bar, the dark blue bar starts to fall rapidly and disappears almost to 2030. Wind and solar are the grey and the yellow bars. Round the clock tenders, which is hybrid projects, they might have wind and solar in and storage, is the orange bar. So this is mainly how they're planning to do this. They've done about 750 gigawatt already, just in terms of what has been commissioned. The third work stream is direct wire supply, which is what we've been working on. I recently learned that this project at Bina was inspired by our work at Riding Sunbeams, which is very gratifying. They've only just done 1 single project. I mean, there's another which is supplies Indian Railways' own high voltage network, which is a little bit different. But they've just done a couple of pilot projects. And at the moment, the station program and the corporate PPAs are going great guns, and they're not moving quickly enough on this. There is vast potential in India for this. So you could have 5 gigawatts of new solar connected, and this is without incorporating energy storage technology, which would increase the cost. It would improve the utilization, but it would increase the cost. Really, really, really big numbers. So enormous amounts of solar connected in relatively small parcels. So because of the carbon intensity of the Indian grid, the carbon savings from doing this are absolutely mind-boggling. 7 million tons of carbon per annum you could save by doing this level of direct wire supply. Why does it work? Solar is cheap, as we've discussed. So if you're a railway, solar is just the cheapest option. The grid supply power is very carbon intensive, and it's becoming more expensive. And there are thousands of miles of track to connect into, right? If you're a solar developer, in the UK and Europe especially, for very high costs and long waits to get a grid connection. And that's typically the key route to market, right? But the railways are right there as an end user with thousands of miles of track, using substantial amounts of electricity. The value proposition, you avoid the grid costs. So, grid costs, the infrastructure cost, the balancing cost, there's a whole load of system costs which get loaded onto grid supply power, which you don't have to pay if you are procuring directly from a co-located generator. And railways are a fantastic off-taker because you know they're going to be there in 20 years using all of your electricity. So it's intrinsically the lowest cost option. We've been working on technical solutions. The important thing, I think, for people who are here to understand is that for DC networks, like you typically have in a metro, this is our demonstrator on a DC network here. It's relatively straightforward. You can supply the AC feeders without needing a load of new technology. You have to do some thinking about protections on the rail side, but it's actually really quite straightforward. And we're expecting some big tenders for that in the UK very soon. Supplying the AC networks is more challenging. It needs new equipment, which is not available on the market today. So that's something that we're working on, and we're looking for an Indian manufacturing partner to do it with. And then finally, just to note, you know, Nama Metro in Bangalore, this is a DC Metro. They've got solar on some station roofs already. They're not supplying their traction system, but we're working with the Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore, starting a feasibility study next month, looking at the new blue line out to Bangalore Airport, seeing if we can power that line entirely with solar, or almost entirely with solar. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Leo. This is a really very inspiring presentation. As my director mentioned, we do have a mandate from a couple of the railways from the Central Asia, including Azerbaijan, and it seems like the railway is a low-hanging fruit in rolling out the renewable energy solution. Interestingly, you mentioned a lot of specific benefits of this combining the renewable energy with transport. And not to mention this stability in consumption or predictability, land availability, which is a really big issue in some countries. Railways are one of the largest landowners, so technically speaking, this is a very low-hanging fruit. And with the electrification of the railways, having own network or grid, this is a great opportunity for them to become very easily integrated with the renewable energy infrastructure. In ADY in Azerbaijan, we had a discussion about creating so-called green hubs, where the passenger stations can be retrofitted into the fully solar supplied stations, where they can be also the charging stations for electric vehicles deployed as part of the redesign. And again, this is something which perhaps you also observed in your work. Again, I got tons of questions to you. We will go back to that after our third presentation, which is equally exciting. And I'm very pleased to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Serena Lin-Wei. Serena serves as a Senior Research Fellow and the Head of Solar System Technology Group in Solar Energy Research Institute of Singapore, the National University of Singapore, NUS. And she's in charge of the research programs to analyze and optimize the performance of solar PVs in the tropics. Her work also includes various types of integrated PV applications, such as floating PV, agrivoltaic, and the innovative urban PV deployment concept for urban tropics. Over to you, Serena.
Okay, thanks for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Serena. I'm heading the Solar System Technology Group in SERIS. We are Solar Energy Research Institute of Singapore, located within National University of Singapore. Right, so a very brief introduction. We are a national research lab that is working on applied solar research. And then given our location in Singapore, which is an urban city and in the tropics, so there are two elements that is always blended in all our R&D and service activities, that is urban and tropics. Right, so these are our R&D areas, which span from solar cells to modules all the way to the systems. So for PV systems, we are looking at different type of integrated PV, such as floating, such as urban solar, which includes agrivoltaic, as well as building integrated photovoltaic. So today I will mainly touch upon about the agrivoltaic works that we do in Singapore, and also looking more beyond to the potential of agrivoltaic in ASEAN countries. So when we talk about Singapore, we probably have some very unique background here, that the Singapore being a very densely populated country. In fact, it's the world's second densely populated country. We have quite ambitious plan in terms of food production. We want to have self-produced 30% of the nutritional needs by 2030, and also deploy 2 gigawatt of solar PV by 2030. But this number may seem small for some countries, but we really have very small area also as a country. So this is relatively ambitious, and both food production and energy production needs space, whereby we don't have that much space. So the agrivoltaic comes into the play that we hope to utilize the same place for multiple purpose, right? So if you this is the picture of the typical farm in the primary farming district in Singapore, which is Lim Chu Kang. So if you go there, you notice that a lot of farm, they are covered by meshes, and some are even black meshes, because most of the plants they are growing there cannot take the midday sun of Singapore. They will suffer from heat stress. So then that immediately bring us to the mission of whether we can use solar PV to provide shading, whereby we can generate electricity. Because one of the pain points for our local farmers is they really suffer from the high energy costs, right? And then this is the plan of our solar of our Singapore Food Agency, whereby they are looking forward towards the integrated food hub, whereby on the rooftop you will have greenhouses, and we also vision that that should be powered at least partially by solar PV, right? And given our space limitation, so we have operate these 2 test beds on the rooftop of a multi-story residential car park. So because in Singapore it's so hot that no one would like to park on the top floor of the multi-story car park. So the local community, they happily offer the space to us as a test bedding. So it's good place, good playground for us to study the impact of solar PV with different type of agriculture setups. So here mainly we are looking at 2 type of growing setup that allow high density growth within the same area. So one is the layer growth, which allows also the options of adding LED to add additional lights to the plants. Of course, we have to bear in mind that if we turn on the LED, ideally the electricity should be coming from the solar panels that is above your greenhouse. And then the other one is the vertical towers. And then we also have fish tanks, whereby the waste from the fish goes to the vegetables as the nutrients. So by looking that, we actually are also seeing how this solar panels, including their amount of shading as well as their angle or the orientation, is affecting the plants. So in fact, the solar panels that we see here, they are in rows and they are rotatable. So they are designed to track the sun to maximize the solar power generation. Meanwhile, they are also programmed that if there is rain coming, the solar panel will automatically close to protect the vegetables or protect the crops below from the rain. And then we have done this experiments for slightly more than a year. And then we try a lot of leafy green vegetables that is commonly grown in Singapore or in this region. And given the time today, that I will just share some like very interesting results, right? And this slide, you see that how the additional LED light help boost the biomass of the vegetables. So the vegetable here in the 2 batches, they are transplanted on the same day and from the same batch of seedlings. And then they are also harvested on the same day, and then their biomass was taken. And then you see a significantly boost in terms of biomass when you turn on the LED compared to you fully rely on the natural sunlight, right? So here we must make sure that the light must be coming from solar panels above again, because the moment when you draw the electricity from the grid, that's probably too high in terms of energy costs. And another one, of course, we also play with amount of shading and then how it affects the plant growth. And then one very obvious example we see is that if you notice, our solar panel in stripes, on the left-hand side, they have 10 cells in the stripe. And on the right-hand side, you have 12 cells in the stripe, and which means different amount of shading. And immediately you can see a very obvious difference of the crop growing, that this part with less shading, there are about 12 to 15% of difference in biomass, whereby there's only 10% difference in shading, right? So that teaches us like how sensitive different type of plants are towards different type of shading. Of course, we can't change the solar panels every day. We can't change the amount of shadings every day. So what we do is we design a simulation platform whereby we can put the design of different type of solar panel, even different orientation and different distance towards the growing setup. And also we can simulate like different type of growing setup, because that's also important that some setup, they also cast shading to the vegetables here and there. So by doing all the simulation, you know how the PV system design and how the agriculture setup design could affect the amount of light that is received in different parts of the greenhouse. So that eventually also have to link to what type of vegetables or what type of crops you are growing, because different crops, they have different amount of requirements in terms of light during their growth, right? And then just also share one, I would say preliminary scenario analysis, but it's actually interesting, will give you some preliminary idea about what solar PV could help in terms of the farmlands. So here, it's a relatively busy slide, but don't worry, I will walk you through that. In this scenario, we assume it's a 1,000 meter square farm area, and then we are growing some common leafy green vegetable, for example, lettuce. And then for this farm, it's designed, which is similar to the commercial farm, whereby the rooftop is at least 3 to 4 meters beyond the growing of the vegetable. So from our experiments, if it's 50% coverage high up in the rooftop, and then you probably cast about 20% to maximum 30% of shading on the ground, which does not affect the crop yield from our experiments, right? So let's first look at this column. So this is a horizontal growth. So either it's soil-based or it's a hydroponics, doesn't matter. For the one layer horizontal growth, the blue one is the production capacity, being in kilogram per month. And then the red one is your sales revenue minus whatever your OPEX, right? So when you don't have solar PV, and then you have one layer of greenery vegetables, which is the most common farms are doing, I think, in Singapore and also in the region. And the moment when you add on solar PV, this is what happens. In this case, given the shading, it doesn't affect my crop production capacity, and it gives you additional sales revenue. That's mainly from the PV electricity, of course. But then you think about that. The ideal way is that I want to use the solar PV that is generated above my greenhouse directly on site. That's the most cost-effective way, right? So in terms of, so instead of just having one layer of vegetables, you could have probably another half layer of vegetables growing below, but you have to supplement it with additional LED. But this LED light, the electricity, is all coming from the solar panels that is covering your greenhouse, right? By doing that, you immediately boost your production capacity and also significantly boost your sales revenue. And then people will ask, what about we grow a lot more layers? Then this what happens is that, yes, you do have significant boost in terms of production capacity. However, the solar electricity that I generate on site is not sufficient, and you have to draw the electricity from the grid. Immediately you suffer from the high cost from the grid electricity, and then your revenue drops significantly. It doesn't make economic sense. Right. So this is for horizontal growth. And then we also study for vertical towers. So the vertical towers, they are already designed in a way that it's allow high density growth. You already maximize amount of light that you could capture from the surrounding. So the moment when I put on the solar panel, immediately it affects the production capacity. So even you have additional income from the PV electricity, still your revenue drops significantly. So this one may still have a lot of assumptions when we are doing this calculations, but it tells you roughly when you're looking at the agrivoltaics that you have to looking at different scenario. First, what type of crops you are growing and what type of growing setups that you have, and especially what type of solar PV designs that you have. So all elements come into the play when you design an agrivoltaic system. So for this project, we also create a lot of impacts in the mainstream media in Singapore. And also last year, we were featured in the Intellectual Property Office of Singapore World IP Day. But what I want to mention here is that actually our Ministry of Sustainability in Singapore, they published a post whereby they have a nice slides which showing different parts of our testbed and how it functions, provide a good education to the public about this option, that if I have a rooftop, I could do solar, I could do greenery, I can combine them. And then look beyond for ASEAN countries. Like Singapore is small, but ASEAN country, there's huge potential. But what has been installed, or what we say is existing and announced agrivoltaic projects. There could be projects which we are unaware of because it was not announced. And this is the amount that we found. And then, but here we have to add the disclaimer that for some countries or many countries, they mainly deploy solar power irrigation systems, meaning the PV system, a lot of them, they are also not vertically integrated with the crops, which we think is the most effective way of maximizing the space and energy generation. And these are the typical examples that we could form about agrivoltaic lands in Singapore, in the ASEAN countries. And then here I want to introduce another terminology. It's called agroforestry. So this is common in many countries whereby you have tall trees, and then you have other layers of crops that are of different heights, whereby the tall trees also castrating to the plants or to the crops below. So this is similar to agrivoltaic, except that agrivoltaic generates energy, right? But we must always remember that the agroforestry, they also have their very strong, very positive impact in terms of climate change mitigation, such as they reduce the soil irrigation. So we consider agrivoltaic, we must also save space for the agroforestry, because especially in environmentally sensitive areas such as forests, wetlands, and water bodies, right? So we couldn't say that all the areas you should use for agrivoltaics. No, we still have to think about the environment. That's why when you think about the potential of agrivoltaics in ASEAN, so there's a very nice a potential estimation that we have to exclude all the environmentally sensitive areas and left with these areas which is possible for agrivoltaic deployments in the 10 ASEAN countries. And then if we think about also looking at the 2050 energy generation targets of all these 10 countries, and considering if I utilize 10% of the areas that we estimated in the previous slide, that already excluding the environmentally sensitive areas, this is the percentage of the agrivoltaic generated power versus the energy generation targets of these countries. So see that for Cambodia and Myanmar, it can supply more than 10%, more than 10 times of the projected electricity generation. For Thailand, it's 2 times. So they could actually export all this additional electricity through the ASEAN power grid to the neighboring countries. And overall, through the ASEAN power grid, in fact, you are actually increasing the energy resilience of all these countries. So right now, this is all under good, valid, active discussions about what is the trading schemes, etc. But for Singapore, of course, if you look at this number, you understand why I'm talking about rooftop agrivoltaics. Right, so I'm come to the last page of my slides. This is our vision, of course. For Singapore, we don't have much space, so we want to consider urban agrivoltaics. But in ASEAN country, there's a huge potential, and it also can coexist with the agroforestry for the sake of our environment. And for ASEAN, even 10% of the geographical potential for agrivoltaic can be deployed. It can supply more than 100% of a projected future electricity generation for the region. Okay, that's all for my presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was really exciting presentation. You really enlighten us with so much potential how we can really use the solar in a very effective way in a very multiple places, multiple solutions, and this is really exciting. Perhaps you might get millions of questions at our Q&A, but let me pass the floor now to Cindy for reflections.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Rafael. No, I just couldn't contain, I said I couldn't contain my excitement earlier. Now I'm even more excited about the potential for working with you, collaborating with all of the presenters here in terms of moving forward with many of our initiatives in the team. So starting with Serena, I know that your solution is very relevant to many of our countries, particularly the Pacific. A couple of which are represented here in our attendees, and if they have questions later, I'd urge them to ask them later. And of course, Pacific countries are land constrained, so they really need this type of solutions that will optimize the use of their land and their sunlight. So I think that's a very huge opportunity, and not only for Pacific, but also for the entire ASEAN. We are looking at cross-sector solutions here and only pushing for renewables, but we stand the risk of actually, not incorporating some of these cross-sector solutions, including agriculture. So we really need to look into this and work with you more closely.
Yeah.
On railway, I think we mentioned already that we have an initiative in Azerbaijan, so we'll be in touch soon. On solar hydrogen for healthcare facilities, I invited quickly our director for our health sector in the bank, Mr. Dodo Banzon, and we have been talking about looking at energy efficiency and solarizing healthcare facilities. Okay, he has no access to talk. Okay, if you could, are you able to type, Dodo, your question? It will be good. But yes, so this is another opportunity for us to work with the UK companies and with UKRI in developing solutions for healthcare facilities. Okay, over to you, Dodo, if you have questions.
Yeah,
Thank you.
sorry. So you can see me, but I think they have muted me, which is fine. Thanks for asking me to join, and hello from Paris. I'm here for the Nutrition Summit right now. But nonetheless, I went to the presentation that was presented on the solar and hydrogen power. Interesting that you are in Papua and of course in Bohol. We are supporting countries so that they could start building not just new health facilities, but even retrofit their health facilities. So we look forward to work with the team that did the presentation, Cindy. We're always looking for new ideas, not just solarization. So that's why I love the hydrogen work. And so, yes, we hope to have a conversation with the team that did the presentation. Of course, the one from Singapore. We've been working with NUS a lot on other things, including decarbonization plans for health systems in Asia and the Pacific. So similarly, we'll be working with NUS in general. So yeah, thanks, Cindy. So thanks again for bringing me in, and wonderful to read and hear about the presentation.
Thank you, Dodo, and all the best. I hear you in Paris today. Thank you so much for joining us, even for a few minutes. Yes, so I'll hand it over back to Rafael for the official Q&A. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Cindy, and thanks, Dora, for joining these presentations. Once again, we've spoken today about the renewable energy, but we have spoken about in 3 different dimensions. We have spoken in the dimension of healthcare, we have spoken about agriculture, and we have spoken about the transport. We have, there are a few questions which I would like to voice, but I would like to check our chat box if there are questions posted. If not, perhaps I would go with those which I have now. And I would also encourage colleagues to raise hand and ask the question or put the question in chat box so we can read it. Look, the renewable energy is not new. And the healthcare, agriculture, and transport problems are not new. But one thing is really amazing is how combining these 2 sectors, you maximize the benefits for your clients, for your partners. The model seemed to be very unique, but it's very solid because both sectors, we all know the right. But combining this and finding the solution seemed to be quite unique. My first question is, would you mind to describe the incentives standing behind this cross-sectorial solution you look at that? I'm interested to know what really made you looking at this in terms of the solution rather than technology provider perspective. So why you look at this as a solution? For example, in case of the hydrogen, why look at this hydrogen, renewable, and the healthcare? What really was the key motive for you to look at that? Same for transport and same for agriculture, because those are the quite really, I wouldn't say close, but they are in the parallel sectors, right? Sarah, would you like to start?
Perhaps I was just going to say, perhaps if Giuseppe started from a technical perspective, but I'm happy to start from the social perspective. Because we're working on the ground in Papua New Guinea, the reality is that the social impact is very close to us. And we have partnerships with hospitals and increasingly with local level government and provincial authorities as well. And it refers back to something that I said in the presentation, that for a country like Papua New Guinea, it's not about energy transition that is really the big issue. It's about access. So where hospitals are being given energy access at the moment, the backup solution is still diesel. So while we are seeing the implementation of solar battery, and particularly as the cost is coming down, which is great, the backup solution is still reliant on fossil fuels. So we were captured by the idea that BPP had when they approached us, which is how could we provide an alternative to that while actually therefore meeting real climate mitigation goals and through decentralization solutions actually meet the needs in very, very remote and difficult and hard to get to communities that frankly will never be connected to the grid. So we came at it very much from the social aspect of this meets our objectives of community regeneration and community development. But what has become very interesting for us is the opportunity that this has been showing us across all forms of critical infrastructure, not just healthcare, but the greatest need that we perceive in a very direct application is within healthcare, and that's a very logical place for us to start. But perhaps, Giuseppe, you could add into the technical side
Yeah.
side of that and why you even approached us in the first place.
Thank you. Yes, from a techno-economic perspective, so BPP already delivered a design of a solar hydrogen microgrid for a Cameroon large community in Cameroon, and we have already found that the cost is comparatively high to a solar battery diesel microgrid. So our approach here with the healthcare facility was really to understand if with the production of oxygen and the offset of diesel, the hydrogen containerized unit, which is already an innovation from the previous study we did, as this is a new kind of technology that was launched in the market, I would say 2 years ago, will prove the business case. And there are some economic findings that will be included in the report in relation to the avoided cost for the diesel and the oxygen as well. In terms of direct incentives, what we are looking at is the estimation of carbon credit that the system will help in achieving. As you know, the value of a carbon credit is not just related to the technology you are deploying, but it's also related to the added value. And of course, here the main questions we have tried to address is, okay, the added value of our project is the provision of oxygen, which can save lives. Is there a way to evaluate this added value? So how much does it cost? How much can you value a life, right, if the system is saving a life? So there are all these considerations, and Cellar has also great experience in carbon credit, and so he's using his connection and collaboration to have also this fit into the technical design of the system.
And I think what
Cool, thank you.
just to close, what Giuseppe is touching on there too is that the reality for healthcare, we can't kid ourselves that the only way that we can electrify a sector like that is that we have to look at some form of subsidization. And in a community or in a developing economy like Papua New Guinea, where livelihood is very low and available government resources is low, therefore institutional investment is important, and that requires subsidization to a greater or lesser extent.
We will be coming back to this financials, and I think this is another spectrum for discussion, right? Maybe we ask Leo to step in. This is his observation.
Sure. I mean, obviously, we are addressing very different situations. Although I have to say, one of the things that I'm hoping might be possible to do in India is to crack open the railway power system is very well resourced and it's pretty ubiquitous. Actually, Indian Railways, infrastructure-wise, is in a better place than the DISCOM, the distribution company, who supply electricity and distribute.
The hydrogen.
It absolutely be
high cost.
to
Very high
power.
cost.
Sorry, would you mind using? Thank you so much. It would absolutely be possible to draw power from the rail traction system, using the same kind of modular converters that you need to put power into it from solar, and that could offer access to electricity to a lot of communities, marginalized communities that don't have it today. So, although in theory, every village now in India does have an electricity supply. It's often only for a couple of hours a day and things like that. They're very undersupplied, although they technically do have a point of connection. Often, you can't run fridges all day long, things like that, right? Which are essential, really. Is essential to have that kind of uninterrupted power supply. I think one challenge that we're going to have on the social side with advancing this in India is something I've realized over the last few months is that a lot of the railway land, because Indian Railways is the biggest landowner in India, a lot of the railway land has quite large communities of squatters on it. It's very commonplace for people to set up makeshift homes beside the railway, and that I think that could be a challenge. You may find that there's large numbers of people living on a site that looks like it ought to be attractive for solar supply to the railway. But yeah, I think Indian Railways potentially has a real role to play in improving energy access for line-side communities, which it's not been considered at all yet. It's not on anybody's radar. But I think it's a conversation that I'm hoping to try to have with them. So
yeah,
well, that's great.
Many thanks. This is really helpful. Serena?
Yeah, I think for agrivoltaics, it's also another topic. And if we look at that, I think if we look at Singapore and other ASEAN countries, then there's also different scenarios. Like in Singapore, when we talk to all the farmers, basically They have some buildings like in the farm, which they will be very happy to deploy solar PV because it really make economic sense to them. The moment they switch on their solar PV, they save half of the electricity, at least half of the electricity price they are paying. But what is the concern is usually if I have to add more solar PV on their greenhouse, there's always the regulation, like what is the safety requirement, what's the structural safety, fire safety, because in Singapore, it has a most stringent requirement in terms of solar PV deployments. So that's probably more the bottlenecks, or sometimes it's probably also the infrastructure because the farming area they may not be incorporated with the most powerful grid that allows a lot of power generated from PV get into the grid. So sometimes this is also a bottleneck. But if you look at the ASEAN countries, I think for farmer wise, they may not have the capital, of course, to do that. But for developers, this is already quite an economically like proven case that if they deploy solar PV, that's quite a good project for them. And sometimes it's also good for the farmers, right? I think for agrivoltaic, that's one thing is always the country probably have to have some regulation in terms of how much of the solar PV or how much it's there's a limitation about when you put in on the PV, what is the impact of your crop yield. That's why in some countries, if there's no such limit, if the farmer is getting more income from the electricity, they probably tend to just use the farmland to make money for them. They don't even have to do farming anymore, right? But it's bad for the agriculture industry for the country. So there's always like pro and cons. So you have to balance the energy generation and crop generation. But economic case for agrivoltaics is usually you're looking at compound interest, compound revenue that you can generate with the land, with both energy generation and food. But it's based on the country or based on the district to decide what is my focus or how much I should put in terms of.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you very much. These are the very interesting observations from all these three projects, which are connected by solar as a source of energy for the transport, for agriculture, for healthcare. We see the participants from our Pacific region, and maybe I ask if there are any questions from the audience. Sorry, I'm just checking the list. Mr. Lei?
Hi, no
Hi.
questions from here.
Oh. All right. Sorry, can it? Simon? Yes. I think the mic is on. Simon, do you hear us? I think there's a little connectivity issue. While we're waiting, I will just put one more question for all of you, and this question is maybe quite naive, but I still want to ask you. When you look at the financial model of your proposal, I guess it was mentioned earlier about so-called element of subsidy required, because certainly the cost recoverability is a big challenge in very innovative projects where you look at the different elements and different components, and affordability, it's another issue, because in some countries the people's affordability of the services, particularly in healthcare, could be really challenging. So if I may ask you, in terms of the financial sustainability or financial model you built for your proposal, what is the percentage of this subsidy you are considering, and how are you expecting this subsidy in terms of the sources? were you expecting this subsidy from the government, or are you expecting this subsidy being sort of translated into the higher than market cost proposal? And how you manage the subsidy element of your in your initiatives?
Shall I respond to that first?
Yeah, I think healthcare comes first, right?
Okay, sure. Certainly in Papua New Guinea, I think the answer is there are lots of ways that that's being dealt with. Aid funding, development funding, subsidization through World Bank programs, partial private sector investment with local government support, and combination of development funding to sort of flesh that out. The issue, particularly within communities in a place like Papua New Guinea, is that their livelihood is so low. So they really don't, it's very difficult. Part of the issue in Papua New Guinea around renewable energy adoption and expansion of grids is that who pays for it? So that's one of the barriers that needs to be addressed. So when we look at community renewable energy, so i.e. electrifying remote villages, for example, we need to begin with livelihood development before we can look at a more commercial return on renewable energy. I think where we're looking at healthcare, though, the current model is generally focused on aid. That's good for only so much of the picture. We need to really start to look at what kind of blended finance models are going to be more sustainable to enable an acceleration of healthcare electrification. I don't have an answer for the question directly until we've actually worked through that in detail ourselves and are putting financial models in front of potential funders and investors for these facilities. So we will have an answer to that question, and I think in 3 to 6 months when we've got feedback from potential investors and funders. These are discussions that are happening. I don't think the answer is going to be an easy one, particularly where you're looking at adoption of new technology, which is going to be more expensive. You know, go back 20 years when solar was first hitting the market, it was extremely expensive.
Right.
And we can see what the impact of that huge investment has been now and the trajectory downwards over the last 20 years, and batteries are now following. So we would imagine that a technology like hydrogen is going to do the same thing, but it's going to take time for it to hit that kind of level.
That's very useful. Thank you. Thank you very much. Leo?
So, Rafael, what's the question?
The subsidy element. How much subsidy element do you envisage in your business model?
So there is no subsidy required for this, right? Because we're now at the stage where solar modules themselves are so cheap that subsidy is no longer required to support renewable energy deployment, right? And in fact, it's nearly always cheaper. And certainly in a country like India, which has very, very high installation rates, you know, most of Southeast Asia as well, you know, it will almost always be the cheapest source of electricity. Now, the reason why we're not seeing it just being deployed absolutely everywhere, and I mean, up to a point we are, but the barriers are not around, you know, the barriers are not around actually needing price support, but around needing price certainty, right? So revenue certainty is absolutely critical for renewable energy. It's all CapEx, there's no OpEx, right? It's almost free, you know, not completely, but it just does not cost very much to maintain. You spend all your money on day one. And what you're doing is effectively you're buying 20, 25 years worth of electricity. And in order for a private wire project to receive investment, what you need is revenue certainty. Now, back in the days when we had subsidy, we had price support mechanisms that governments had in place, you knew anyone who could work a spreadsheet could produce an accurate revenue model. You knew what your yield would be for 20 years into the future, because you knew exactly what the government was going to pay you for every kilowatt hour that you generate. Trying to do this on a merchant basis, where you're exporting to the grid, and you don't know what you're going to be paid for your electricity, pushes up the cost of capital. It makes your project more risky, and it means that you can't access low-cost capital. But if you can't access low-cost capital, your cost of capital is the biggest determinant of whether a renewable energy project is going to be viable or not. And so that's been, in the UK, we have something called contracts for difference. It's not exactly a subsidy regime. It is a price support mechanism in precisely to solve that problem, right? Mainly for offshore wind is what it's been used for. So that you know exactly how much you're going to get paid for the energy that you generate. And actually, if the price on the market has gone higher than the price you've been committed, you have to pay back into the pot. So that's how contracts for difference works. For smaller scale projects, things on the megawatt, a few megawatts at a time, those kind of mechanisms are not suitable and they're not available anyway. So having a private wire off-taker is a really good replacement for that, right? Who is able to sign a contract with you that is for the life of the asset. So 25-year power purchase agreements where they just commit to paying a specific price for every unit of electricity that you pay for the whole of that time. Now, that will mean that if you're a developer, you can go, that's very bankable, right? And the reason why railways are so attractive as a way to move on from subsidy is that if you think about a private sector factory that is making goods and is so that in some ways that's a great, you should co-locate a solar farm next to the factory and you can sell power to them. You can't be completely confident that they will still be there in 20 years buying all of your electricity, and so that introduces risk, and that is going to affect your cost of capital. For a railway is a AAA credit rated, in the UK, they're AAA credit rated. They're state-backed entities. You absolutely know that they will still be there in 20-25 years using all of the power that you're providing. So for a private wire project, which doesn't have a grid connection, and it's just going to a single end user, the single end user as a railway is absolutely perfect. So yeah, no subsidies required in this scenario. I think you might need, the thing that requires a bit of a upfront investment is solving the technology challenges, because somebody's going to need to spend a bit of money on developing equipment that can do this. Brilliant. Thanks, Raf.
This is very helpful. Thank you so much. Serena?
Yeah, I think Leo has answered most because it's similar here for solar deployment. It's no longer something that is really needs a subsidy. And if you consider the project developers, they get the solar PV deployments on the farm, actually it's quite a lucrative project for them. Consider the solar electricity plus the renewable energy certificate. Right. And then, but for agrivoltaics, there's something like there's also farmers, right? But it's unlikely, I think majority of the farmers, it's unlikely for them to pay for the whole solar PV project because it's a high upfront cost. So eventually, a lot of cases under power purchase agreement. So that is already a very mature scheme for solar PV. So which Leo has touched upon a lot about the typical.
Cool. We are almost it's a 5:07 in Manila. We are running out of the time and we still have a few questions, but my suggestion would be is we will consolidate those questions or we email it to you, and we really want to hear more about your experience. We had a very good presentations on how the solar can be harnessed in 3 different sectors, applying so-called cross-sectorial approach, an integrated approach. And I think what we heard is very interesting and enlightening, because we have seen the key motifs of this cross-sectorial solution. We also understand the so-called sustainability aspect, well, financial aspect, and 2 out of 3 sectors seem to be financially viable and having strong economic financial rationale. The third sector, healthcare, seems to have an even stronger economic rationale. However, financially, on financial terms, the subsidy element is absolutely necessity given the affordability for the services, and that has been highlighted. These are very, very useful presentations, very interesting ideas, and we will certainly stay in touch with you on those subjects. But now I would like to ask Cindy for her closing remarks and recommendations. Over to you, Cindy.
Thank you so much, Rafael, and thank you so much to all our speakers, Serena, Leo, and Stellar. Very, very excellent and interesting presentations, and we certainly have a lot of actionable items here. We will be in touch soon with all of you for potential collaborations. It is late in the Pacific, so probably why we didn't get some questions from them, but I'd encourage everyone to email any questions, or if you want the contact details of the presenters, please do let us know. We will share those so you can contact them directly for any questions you may have. And the same for everyone else here online and also in the office in HQ. Thank you for joining, and we appreciate your support and your commitment to cross-sector solutions. Please do send your questions if you have to us. And thank you again to all our speakers. Congratulations for an excellent webinar. And thank you to organizers, our team here, Lidit and Gina and Rafael, and of course the Emerging Areas team. Thank you and have a great evening.
Thank you.
Good day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you
Bye.
very much.